Sometimes the hardest thing about losing everything isn't the grief, it's learning how to care again. For 30 years, Lars Eriksson has lived alone in the Alaska wilderness, hiding from a world that took his family and left him with nothing but regrets. His cabin sits in the mountains where winter never truly ends, and he's convinced himself that solitude is safer than risking his heart again. But on the coldest night in decades, when the snow falls like ash and the wind cuts through everything, he finds a teenage girl, half frozen in his tool shed. She won't tell him her name or where she came from, only whispers that they're watching. Against his better judgment, he lets her stay. By morning, she leads him to an ancient cave hidden deep in the forest, where impossible things wait in the darkness. What he discovers there will force him to choose between his safe isolation and protecting someone who desperately needs him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The gold band on Lars Eriksson's weathered finger caught the firelight as he stirred the cast-iron pot, the metal worn thin from 3 decades of nervous turning. He'd stopped taking it off years ago, not out of hope, but because removing it felt like betraying the only good thing he'd ever done with his life. The wedding ring was all that remained of Dr. Lars Eriksson, the man who once mapped geological formations across 3 continents and believed the Earth held answers to everything. Now he was just a ghost haunting these mountains, keeping company with regret and silence. His cabin squatted against the Alaska wilderness like a defiant fist, built from logs he'd cut himself after the world had finished taking everything that mattered. 40 miles from the nearest road, 60 from the nearest human being, or so he'd thought until tonight. The structure was solid, practical, designed by a man who understood that comfort was a luxury the broken couldn't afford. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace that had never failed him, and windows small enough to keep the cold out, but large enough to watch for the nothing that usually came. The girl lay on his couch, wrapped in every blanket he owned, her breathing finally steady after hours of worrying she might not make it through the night. She couldn't be more than 16, with dark hair that framed a face too serious for her age, and eyes that held the kind of wariness that came from seeing too much too young. When he'd first found her curled in his tool shed, her lips had been blue and her skin ice cold. But something about the way she'd looked at him, not with fear, but with recognition, had shaken him more than the freezing temperature. "They're watching," she'd whispered before losing consciousness, and those words had been rattling around his skull ever since. Lars set down his spoon and studied her sleeping form. In the firelight, she looked fragile, like something that might disappear if he spoke too loud or moved too fast. But there had been nothing fragile about the way she'd gripped his arm when he'd carried her inside, or the practiced way she'd positioned herself in the corner of the room where she could see both the door and the window. This wasn't some lost hiker who'd wandered off a trail. This was someone who understood danger. The storm outside had intensified, rattling the windows and sending drafts through gaps he'd thought he'd sealed years ago. It was the kind of weather that killed the unprepared and reminded the prepared how small they really were. In 3 decades of mountain living, Lars had seen plenty of storms, but this one felt different, angrier, like nature itself was trying to keep something out or trap something in. He turned back to his maps, spread across the kitchen table like memories he couldn't fold away. Geological surveys from his former life, when he'd worked for the U.S. Geological Survey and believed that understanding the Earth meant understanding how to live on it. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent his career studying the ground beneath other people's feet while failing to find solid footing for his own life. These particular maps showed the region around his cabin in detail that would make most cartographers jealous. Every ridge, every valley, every cave system within a 100-mile radius was marked with the precision of a man who'd walked every inch of it. After Sarah and Emma died, he'd sold everything and used the money to buy this land, then spent years exploring every corner of it, as if mapping his grief might help him navigate it. The girl stirred, and Lars found himself holding his breath. He wasn't used to the sound of another person in his space, and part of him wondered if he was dreaming, if 30 years of isolation had finally driven him to hallucinations. But then she opened her eyes, and the sharp intelligence in them reminded him this was real. "You're awake," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "How are you feeling?" She pushed herself up slowly, wincing as movement brought back circulation to cold, stiffened muscles. "Better. Thank you." Her voice carried a slight accent he couldn't place, something that suggested English wasn't her first language, though she spoke it fluently. "What's your name?" "Maya." She said it like she was testing the word, as if names were something she wasn't sure she was allowed to have. "Maya." Lars nodded, filing the information away with the growing list of questions he wasn't sure she'd answer. "I'm Lars. This is my home. You're safe here." Something flickered across her face at the word safe, not relief, but something closer to sadness. "For now." "What does that mean?" She pulled the blankets closer around herself, and Lars noticed her hands. They were soft like a teenager's should be, but there were small scars across her palms and fingertips, the kind that came from handling sharp objects or rough materials. These weren't the hands of someone who'd lived a sheltered life. "It means nowhere is safe for very long," she said. "Not for people like me." "People like you?" Maya studied his face for a long moment, as if weighing whether he could be trusted with the truth. "People who know things they shouldn't." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lars had spent 30 years avoiding complications, but looking at this girl, this Maya, he felt something stirring in his chest that he'd thought was dead. The protective instinct that had made him a good husband and father, the drive to shelter and defend that had died with his family. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Instead of pushing for answers she clearly wasn't ready to give. Maya nodded, and Lars ladled soup into a bowl, watching as she accepted it with the careful gratitude of someone who hadn't been shown kindness in a long time. She ate slowly, methodically, like fuel rather than pleasure, and he found himself remembering Emma at that age, all sharp elbows and fierce independence, challenging the world with every breath. The memory should have hurt, but somehow it didn't. Not in the usual way. "The storm should pass by morning," Lars said, settling into the chair across from her. "I can give you supplies, help you get to wherever you're trying to go." Maya shook her head. "I'm not trying to go anywhere. I was trying to find you." The words hit him like cold water. In 30 years, no one had tried to find him. He'd made sure of that, had chosen this place specifically because it was where someone could disappear completely. The idea that someone had sought him out, that his isolation had been deliberately breached, sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the weather. "Why?" "Because you're the only one left who might understand." Maya set down her empty bowl and met his eyes. "You're Dr. Lars Eriksson. You worked for the USGS. You mapped geological anomalies across North America before you disappeared." Hearing his former name spoken aloud was like being slapped. He hadn't been Dr. Eriksson for 3 decades. That man had died in a hospital waiting room when they told him there was nothing they could do, that his wife and daughter were gone, and he'd have to learn how to live with the empty spaces they'd left behind. That was a long time ago. he said carefully. But you remember, the anomalous readings, the places where instruments stopped working correctly, the sites that didn't match any known geological formations. Lars did remember. Those had been the cases that fascinated and frustrated him, the locations where everything he understood about Earth science seemed to break down. Readings that made no sense, rock formations that shouldn't exist, electromagnetic fields that appeared and disappeared without explanation. He documented them all, filed reports that probably gathered dust in some government warehouse, and moved on to the next mystery. "What does any of that have to do with you?" he asked. Maya pulled something from her pocket, a compass, but unlike any he'd ever seen. The casing was dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and instead of pointing north, the needle spun in slow, purposeful circles before settling on a direction that definitely wasn't magnetic north. "It has everything to do with me," she said, "because I'm from one of those places you mapped, and tomorrow I need you to help me get back there." The compass needle swung toward the north wall of his cabin, pointing toward the deep mountains where Lars knew the terrain became impossible, where even he had never ventured. The device hummed with a sound so low it was more felt than heard, like the earth itself was calling. Outside, the storm reached a crescendo, wind howling through the peaks with a voice that sounded almost human, almost like a warning. Lars looked from the compass to Maya's serious young face, and for the first time in 30 years, he felt the familiar thrill of discovery, the sense that he was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. It terrified him. But it also made him feel alive. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "we'll talk about where you need to go. Tonight, you rest." Maya nodded and settled back into the blankets, but Lars noticed she kept the strange compass clutched in her hand, its impossible needle pointing steadily toward whatever waited in the mountains. He returned to his geological maps, but now they looked different, not like records of the past, but like clues to something he'd missed, something that had been waiting for him to be ready to find it. The wedding ring on his finger caught the firelight again, and for the first time in 3 decades, Lars wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was ready to stop running from the world and start protecting something in it again. Dawn came grey and brittle, the storm having blown itself out during the night and left behind a world wrapped in fresh snow. Lars had slept fitfully in his chair, unwilling to leave Maya alone, and unable to shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered existence. The strange compass sat on the table between them, like a question he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Maya was already awake when he stirred, sitting cross-legged on the couch and staring out the window with the intense focus of someone watching for danger. She'd folded the blankets with military precision and arranged them in a neat stack, as if preparing for a quick departure. "We need to go," she said without preamble. "Now." "Go where?" Lars stretched the kinks out of his neck and reached for his coffee pot. "You still haven't told me what's so important about wherever that compass is pointing." Maya picked up the device, and its needle immediately swung toward the mountains with mechanical certainty. "There's a place up there, hidden, protected, but not for much longer." Before Lars could ask what she meant, the sound reached them, a distant, rhythmic thumping that had nothing to do with nature. He'd lived in these mountains long enough to recognize every natural sound they made, and this wasn't one of them. This was man-made, mechanical, helicopters. Maya was on her feet instantly, her young face gone pale. "They found me." Lars moved to the window, scanning the grey sky until he spotted them, 2 black specks moving in a search pattern across the valley below. Military birds by the look of them, flying low and methodical like they were hunting something specific. "Who found you?" he asked, but Maya was already pulling on the spare boots he'd given her. "People who think they own what I'm protecting." She tucked the compass into her jacket and looked at him with desperate urgency. "Dr. Eriksson Lars, I know you came here to get away from the world, but the world isn't going to leave us alone. Not now that they know where I am." The helicopters were getting closer, their sound growing from a whisper to a growl. Lars watched them bank and turn, and something cold settled in his stomach. These weren't search and rescue birds looking for a lost hiker. The deliberate pattern of their search, the military precision of their movement, someone was hunting. "What exactly are you protecting?" he asked. Maya grabbed his geological maps from the table, spreading them out and pointing to a region northeast of his cabin. "You mapped anomalous readings here 15 years ago. Electromagnetic interference, rock formations that didn't match surrounding geology. Your report mentioned it briefly, just a footnote about unexplained phenomena." Lars remembered. It had been one of his last field assignments before the accident, a routine survey that had turned strange when all his instruments started malfunctioning near a particular ridge. He'd noted the anomalies in his report, but hadn't pursued them. At the time, he'd been more interested in getting home to Sarah and Emma than chasing scientific curiosities in the wilderness. "I remember," he said, "but what does that have to do with everything?" Maya's finger traced a route on the map that led deep into terrain Lars had never explored. "That's where we need to go. That's what they're really looking for." The helicopter sounds grew louder, and through the window Lars could see the aircraft had split up, one heading toward his valley, while the other continued searching to the south. The lead bird would be overhead in minutes. "If we're going anywhere," Lars said, pulling on his heavy coat, "we go now." He moved with the efficiency of 3 decades in the wilderness, grabbing his pack and filling it with supplies, while Maya watched the approaching helicopter with growing anxiety. Into the pack went food, medical supplies, his emergency radio, and after a moment's hesitation, his father's hunting rifle. He hadn't carried a weapon in years, but something about the military precision of those aircraft suggested they weren't dealing with park rangers. "Can you travel fast?" he asked Maya. "Faster than you'd think," Lars believed her. Despite her youth, everything about Maya suggested someone accustomed to hardship and danger. The way she moved, the way she watched corners and exits, the practiced silence of her footsteps. This wasn't her first time running from something. They slipped out the back of the cabin just as the first helicopter crested the ridge, its rotors chopping the air with aggressive precision. Lars led Maya into the tree line, using paths he'd worn over 3 decades of solitary exploration, routes that would be invisible from the air and nearly impossible to follow on foot without knowing exactly where to look. Behind them, the helicopter circled his cabin like a predator that had found fresh scent. "They'll search the building," Maya said as they climbed through snow-heavy pines. "When they don't find me, they'll expand the search pattern. How long do we have?" "Not long enough." Lars set a pace that would have challenged most hikers, but seemed comfortable for Maya. She moved through the wilderness with surprising grace, stepping where he stepped and avoiding the small mistakes that would leave obvious tracks. Whoever had taught her to move like this had done it well. The compass in her hand never wavered, pointing steadily toward the high country, where the mountains became a maze of granite peaks and hidden valleys. Lars knew that terrain was dangerous, even in good weather in winter. It could be lethal. But looking back at the helicopters now spreading their search pattern wider, he realized staying put might be even more dangerous. "Tell me about the people following you," he said as they climbed. Maya was quiet for so long that Lars thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "They call themselves researchers, say they're working for the government, for the good of national security. But what they really want is to take something that was never meant to be taken. And you're stopping them?" "I'm trying to." They crested a ridge, and Lars paused to check their position against his mental map of the area. The helicopter sounds had faded but not disappeared. The aircraft was still searching, just farther away. "For now, the place we're going," Maya continued, "it's not like anywhere you've mapped before. Your instruments malfunctioned because they couldn't process what they were measuring. Some things don't fit into scientific categories." Lars wanted to argue with that, spent a lifetime believing that everything in the natural world could be understood, catalogued, explained. But looking at Maya's compass with its impossible needle, he found his certainty wavering. They pushed deeper into the mountains, following game, trails and natural paths that Lars had explored over the years. The terrain grew rougher, more vertical, and the trees began to thin as they climbed toward the tree line. But Maya's compass never wavered, pulling them toward something that waited in the high country. It was Maya who first noticed the markings. "Look," she said, pointing to a massive pine that blocked their path. Carved into the bark were symbols Lars didn't recognize, not letters or numbers, but shapes that seemed to suggest meaning without quite delivering it. The cuts were old, but still visible, made with precision and purpose by someone who understood the significance of what they were creating. "Trail markers?" Lars asked. "Warnings," Maya corrected. "They're telling us we're getting close." More trees bore similar markings as they climbed, creating a trail of symbols that led deeper into territory Lars had never seen. The carvings grew more elaborate as they went, evolving from simple geometric shapes to complex patterns that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. The helicopter sounds returned, closer this time, and Maya pulled Lars under the cover of a granite overhang. Through gaps in the rock, he could see the aircraft moving in tight search patterns, their crews using equipment that definitely wasn't standard civilian gear. "Military?" he asked. "Worse," Maya said. "Private contractors. No rules, no oversight, no limits on what they'll do to get what they want." The helicopters passed overhead, and Lars found himself thinking about his geological maps, about all the anomalous readings he'd documented and dismissed over the years. How many of them had been like this? How many mysteries had he catalogued and forgotten, filing them away as curiosities instead of recognizing them as doorways to something larger? When the aircraft sounds faded again, they continued climbing. The compass pulled them toward a narrow valley between two peaks, a place where the very air seemed different, thinner, more electric, charged with possibility. "How much farther?" Lars asked. Maya checked her compass and smiled for the first time since he'd found her. "We're almost there." But even as she spoke, the sound of rotors returned, and this time they were heading directly toward the valley. Someone had figured out where they were going. The race was on. The valley Maya's compass led them to defied everything Lars understood about mountain geography. What should have been a gradual descent between two peaks instead dropped away in sharp terraces, as if the earth had been carved by something with intelligence and purpose, rather than shaped by millions of years of erosion and geological pressure. "This isn't natural," Lars murmured, studying the rock formations that stepped down the valley floor like an ancient amphitheater. Maya picked her way down the stone terraces with the confidence of someone who'd been here before. "Depends on what you mean by natural." The helicopter sounds had grown distant again, but Lars knew it was only a matter of time before their pursuers figured out this valley existed. From the air, it would be nearly invisible. The narrow entrance between the peaks created a perfect optical illusion that made the opening look like solid rock face. Only from exactly the right angle could you see it was actually a passage. "How did you know about this place?" Lars asked as they descended. "I've been protecting it for 3 years," Maya said. "Ever since Dr. Chen's expedition disappeared." The name meant nothing to Lars, but the way Maya said it with a mixture of sadness and responsibility suggested it should. "Who was Dr. Chen?" "Someone like you. A scientist who thought she could understand everything if she just asked the right questions." Maya paused at the edge of what looked like a frozen waterfall, its ice surface too smooth and uniform to be entirely natural. She found this place first. Found what's inside, and what she discovered got her team killed. Behind the waterfall, barely visible through the curtain of ice, Lars could make out what looked like an opening in the rock face. The entrance was perfectly round, too geometrically precise to be natural, and carved with symbols that matched the ones they'd seen on the trees. "There," Maya said, pointing to a stone tablet partially buried in snow at the base of the waterfall. "That's how you know you found the right place." Lars brushed snow from the tablet's surface and found himself looking at inscriptions, unlike anything in his geological experience. The symbols weren't carved so much as grown into the stone, as if the rock itself had been convinced to take on these shapes. The writing, if it was writing, seemed to shift and flow even as he watched, rearranging itself into patterns that almost made sense before sliding back into mystery. "I can't read this," he said. "No one can. But you don't need to read it to understand what it means." Maya approached the tablet and placed her hand on its surface. The moment her skin made contact, the symbols began to glow with a soft blue light that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. "It's a boundary marker, a warning that says some things are meant to stay hidden." The light faded when Maya removed her hand, leaving Lars staring at stone that looked completely ordinary once again. His scientific mind raced through possible explanations: phosphorescent minerals, piezoelectric effects, bioelectric fields, but none of them felt adequate to explain what he'd just witnessed. "The cave entrance is behind the waterfall," Maya continued, shouldering her pack. "The ice never melts completely, even in summer, but there's a passage underneath." She led him around the base of the waterfall to where the ice met the rock, revealing a gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The opening exhaled air that felt warm against Lars's face, carrying a sense of deep earth and something else, something organic and alive that had no business existing this deep in the mountains in winter. "Maya," Lars said as she prepared to enter the cave, "what exactly are we walking into?" She turned back to him, and in the strange blue-tinted light reflected from the ice, her young face looked ancient. "Something that's been waiting for you a lot longer than 3 years." The passage beyond the waterfall was a natural tunnel that curved gently downward into the mountain's heart. But as they moved deeper, Lars began to notice details that challenged his understanding of cave formation. The walls were too smooth, the angles too precise, the acoustics too perfect. This wasn't a cave carved by water or tectonic activity. This was architecture. "The expedition that disappeared," Lars said as they walked. "Dr. Chen's team, what happened to them?" Maya's footsteps echoed strangely in the tunnel, as if the sound was being absorbed and redistributed by the stone itself. "They found what they came looking for, but they didn't understand what they'd found, and they tried to take it with them." "Take what?" "You'll see." The tunnel opened into a vast chamber that defied the mountain's external dimensions. Lars's geological training told him that the space they'd entered was impossibly large, The mountain simply wasn't big enough to contain a cavern of this size. But there it was, stretching away into darkness that his flashlight couldn't penetrate. "The acoustics," Lars whispered, and heard his voice return from distances that shouldn't exist. "Careful with sound in here," Maya warned. "Sometimes it wakes things up." The floor of the chamber was smooth stone, covered with symbols identical to those on the tablet outside. But here they weren't carved, they were part of the rock itself, formed during whatever process had created this space. And unlike the tablet, these symbols glowed with their own light, creating a constellation on the cavern floor that pulsed in slow, rhythmic patterns. "Bioluminescence?" Lars asked, kneeling to examine the glowing symbols more closely. "Not exactly." Maya walked to the center of the chamber, where the symbol patterns converged in a complex mandala of light and stone. Dr. Chen thought the same thing at first. Tried to take samples, run tests, apply scientific method to something that operates by different rules. Lars followed the symbols with his flashlight, tracing their paths as they flowed across the cavern floor like a vast circuit board. The patterns were hypnotically complex, suggesting mathematical relationships that felt familiar, yet remained just beyond his comprehension. What happened when she tried to study it? Maya gestured toward the far wall of the chamber, where Lars's light revealed something that made his breath catch. Scattered across the stone floor were pieces of equipment, scientific instruments, sample containers, and personal effects that belonged to a research expedition. But they weren't just abandoned, they were integrated into the cave itself, partially absorbed by the rock, as if the mountain had been slowly digesting them. "The cave defended itself," Maya said simply. "It's not malicious, but it doesn't like being treated as a resource to be exploited." Lars approached the scattered equipment with the careful steps of someone walking through a graveyard. Among the partially absorbed instruments, he could make out spectrometers, seismic sensors, and sample collection gear. Expensive scientific equipment that represented thousands of hours of research and preparation. "How many people?" he asked. Dr. Chen's team was 6 people, all experienced researchers, all prepared for standard geological survey work. Maya's voice carried a weight of responsibility that seemed too heavy for her teenage shoulders. None of them understood what they were walking into. The chamber around them pulsed with gentle light, and Lars realized the symbols weren't just decorative, they were functional. The patterns responded to their presence, growing brighter as they moved through the space and dimming when they stood still. The entire cavern was alive in some way that scientific vocabulary couldn't adequately describe. "And you?" Lars asked. "How do you understand it?" Maya placed her hand on one of the central symbols, and the entire chamber responded with a wave of light that traveled outward from her touch, like ripples on a pond. "Because I'm not trying to take anything from it. I'm trying to protect it." The sound of helicopters returned, echoing down the tunnel behind them with mechanical insistence. Their pursuers had found the valley. "We need to go deeper," Maya said. "There's something you need to see before they get here." The deeper chambers of the cave system revealed architecture that belonged in no geology textbook Lars had ever studied. Passages branched and converged with mathematical precision, creating a network that felt more like a vast organism than a simple cave system. But it was the crystalline formation in the central chamber that stopped him cold. Rising from the cavern floor like a frozen tree, the crystal structure pulsed with inner light that shifted from deep blue to brilliant white in rhythm with Maya's breathing. The formation stood nearly 20 feet tall, its surface covered in the same symbolic writing they'd seen throughout the cave. But here the symbols moved constantly, flowing across the crystal's faceted surface like living text. This is what Dr. Chen was trying to study, Maya said, approaching the crystal with reverent care. She called it a geological impossibility, said crystals this size couldn't form naturally in these conditions. Lars circled the formation, his scientist's mind racing through everything he knew about crystal growth and formation. Maya was right. This structure violated several fundamental principles of mineralogy. The size, the clarity, the complex internal geometry that created those shifting patterns of light, none of it should exist. "What is it?" he asked. "We don't really have words for what it is," Maya replied, placing her palm against the crystal's surface. The moment her skin made contact, the entire structure flared with brilliant light, and Lars felt something like electricity dance across his skin. "But I can show you what it does." The crystal responded to Maya's touch, like a tuning fork responding to sound. Light raced through its internal structure, creating patterns that were hypnotically beautiful and somehow familiar, as if Lars was remembering something he'd never learned. The symbols flowing across its surface quickened their movement, and the chamber around them began to resonate, with a sound too low to hear but felt in the bones. "Maya," Lars said, taking an involuntary step backward, "what's happening?" "It's responding to you," she said, and there was surprise in her voice. "That's not supposed to happen." The crystal's light grew brighter, and suddenly Lars could see the chamber in perfect detail, despite the depth of their underground location. The walls were covered in more symbols, arranged in complex patterns that suggested vast knowledge systems. But scattered throughout the chamber were other things, objects that definitely didn't belong in any natural cave formation. Skeletal remains lay partially embedded in the stone floor, but they weren't human bones. The proportions were wrong, the structure too alien, suggesting creatures that had never walked the Earth's surface. Some were small, delicate things with too many joints in their limbs. Others were massive, with skulls that bore no resemblance to any terrestrial life form. "Jesus," Lars whispered, kneeling beside what looked like the rib cage of something the size of a horse, but with bone structure that defied classification. "What are these?" Dr. Chen thought they might be fossils from some unknown evolutionary branch, Maya said, but her voice carried doubt. She was wrong. "These aren't old. They're recent." The implications of that statement hit Lars like cold water. If these weren't fossils, if these creatures had died recently, then they had come from somewhere. And if they had come from somewhere, that meant somewhere else existed, somewhere that could produce life forms unlike anything in the known world. "Recent, how recent?" he asked. Maya moved deeper into the chamber, where more skeletal remains were scattered across the cavern floor like casualties from some impossible battle. "Some of them were here when I first arrived 3 years ago. Others appeared after Dr. Chen's expedition." "Appeared? The cave brings things through sometimes. Usually they don't survive the transition." Maya's voice carried a sadness that seemed too mature for her years. "Doctor." Chen thought she could control the process, could use the crystal to open and close the passage at will. She was wrong about that too. Lars examined more of the remains, his geological training helping him identify bone structures and formations, even when the underlying biology was completely foreign. Whatever these creatures were, they had possessed sophisticated skeletal systems, complex nervous structures, and in some cases, what looked like artificial modifications, metal implants and crystalline growths that had been integrated into living bone. "Passage to where?" he asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. "Somewhere else," Maya said simply. "Another place, another world maybe, or another version of this one. The crystal is connected to it, like a doorway that opens when certain conditions are met." The crystal's light pulsed more rapidly now, and Lars could feel something building in the air around them, a pressure that had nothing to do with altitude or weather. The symbols on the walls began glowing in response to the crystal's activation, creating a network of light that transformed the entire chamber into something that looked more like a control room than a natural cave. "Maya," Lars said carefully, "are you human?" She was quiet for a long moment, her hand still pressed against the crystal's surface. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was, mostly, before I came here." "What does that mean?" "It means the crystal changes things, changes people who spend too much time near it." Dr. Chen noticed it happening to her team: enhanced reflexes, improved night vision, the ability to read the symbols without training. She thought it was beneficial adaptation. She didn't realize what she was becoming. Lars looked at Maya with new understanding. Her uncanny ability to move through wilderness terrain, her knowledge of the cave system, the way the crystal and symbols responded to her touch. She wasn't entirely human anymore. She was something new, something adapted to this place and its impossible physics. "And me?" he asked. "Is it affecting me?" "It already has," Maya said, turning to look at him with eyes that reflected the crystal's light like mirrors. "The moment you entered the cave, the process began. That's why the crystal is responding to you, why you can see the symbols so clearly. You're becoming like me." The helicopter sounds echoed down from the entrance chambers, much closer now. Their pursuers had found the cave entrance and were following their trail into the mountain's depths. "They're coming," Maya said, finally removing her hand from the crystal. The light dimmed but didn't disappear, leaving the chamber bathed in a gentle glow that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of a vast heartbeat. "And when they get here, they're going to try to take this. Try to weaponize it." "Can they?" Maya's expression grew grim. Dr. Chen thought she could control it too, but the crystal doesn't belong to our world, and it doesn't follow our rules. When they try to force it to do what they want, it's going to defend itself. "How?" "By opening the passage completely," Maya said, "and letting everything on the other side come through." The sound of boots on stone echoed from the tunnels above them, growing steadily closer. Whatever choice Lars was going to make about his involvement in this mystery, he was going to have to make it soon. The military dog tags lay scattered around what had once been a campsite deeper in the cave system, their metal surfaces dulled by time, and something else, a patina that looked organic, as if the cave itself had been slowly consuming them. Lars picked up one of the tags with trembling fingers, reading the stamped metal in the crystal's ethereal light. "Martinez, Eduardo, Staff Sergeant, United States Army Special Forces." The date made his blood run cold. These tags were from 15 years ago. There were others before Dr. Chen, Maya said quietly, gathering more of the scattered tags. "Military expeditions, black ops teams, scientists working for defense contractors. They've all found this place eventually, and they've all made the same mistake." Lars counted the tags: 8 soldiers, all special forces, all from a mission that, according to official records, had never existed. Their equipment lay scattered around the chamber like the remains of Dr. Chen's team. But these artifacts were older, more thoroughly integrated into the cave's stone structure. Rifles grew from the walls like metallic trees, their barrels twisted into impossible spirals. Communication gear had become part of the floor, its circuits visible through translucent stone like fossilized electronics. "What mistake?" Lars asked, though he was beginning to understand. They thought they could control it, contain it, turn it into a weapon. Maya held up a dog tag bearing the name Chen, Sarah, and a civilian designation. Dr. Chen wasn't the first scientist to study this place. She was just the most recent to die, trying. The name hit Lars like a physical blow. Sarah Chen. The same first name as his wife, but that wasn't what made his hands shake as he took the tag from Maya. The identification number stamped below the name was a USGS employee code, one that meant this Dr. Chen had worked for the same organization he had, possibly during the same period. "I might have known her," he whispered. "If she worked for the survey 15 years ago, we might have crossed paths." "She mentioned you in her journal," Maya said gently. "Said you were one of the few geologists who documented anomalous readings without trying to explain them away. She thought you might understand what she'd found." The helicopter sounds from above had stopped, replaced by something worse, silence that meant their pursuers had landed and were now moving through the cave system on foot. Professional silence, the kind that came from people who knew how to hunt other people in confined spaces. Maya led Lars deeper into the chamber, where the integration of human technology with the cave's alien architecture became even more pronounced. Scientific instruments from multiple expeditions created a bizarre museum of failed attempts to understand and control the crystal's power. Spectrometers had become part of the wall structure, their displays showing readings that couldn't possibly be accurate. Seismic equipment registered earthquakes that weren't happening. Magnetic field detectors spun wildly, despite being embedded in solid rock. "Dr. Chen's research station is through here," Maya said, leading him toward a section of the chamber where the crystal formations created a natural alcove. The research station was a testament to scientific ambition and hubris. Dr. Sarah Chen had established a comprehensive laboratory in the heart of the mountain, complete with power generators, computer systems, and analysis equipment that represented millions of dollars in funding. But like everything else human in this place, the technology had begun merging with the cave's organic architecture. Computer monitors grew from the stone walls, their screens displaying data streams in languages that weren't quite human. Power cables had become root systems that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. Most disturbing of all, Dr. Chen's research journal lay open on a table that had partially merged with the cave floor, its pages covered with handwriting that shifted between English and the flowing symbols that decorated the cavern walls. She was changing too, Lars realized, reading entries that started in neat scientific notation and devolved into something that looked more like poetry or prophecy. Day 47. Crystal responds to electromagnetic stimulation. Preliminary analysis suggests artificial origin, but geological dating indicates formation predates human civilization by millions of years. Contradiction requires further investigation. Day 73. Team reporting enhanced sensory capabilities. Night vision improved 300%, reflexes testing at superhuman levels. Side effects appear beneficial, but recommend medical evaluation upon return to base. Day 91. Base camp no longer responding to radio contact. Suspect electromagnetic interference from crystal formations. Team has decided to continue research independently. Discovery too important to abandon due to communication difficulties. Day 134. We understand now. The crystal isn't just a formation, it's a doorway. The symbols aren't decorative, they're instructions. We've been wrong about everything. We thought we found it, but it found us. It's been calling to us, waiting for us to develop enough to make contact. The things that come through aren't invaders, they're refugees. The final entries were written in the flowing symbol language, but somehow Lars could read them. The knowledge felt wrong in his mind, like trying to use muscles he'd never had before, but the meaning was clear. The passage opens when the guardians are ready. We failed as guardians because we tried to own what we were meant to protect. The girl will understand. She carries the old blood, the connection that we lost when we chose dominance over stewardship. If she comes, if she finds this place, she must not make our mistakes. The crystal must be protected, not controlled. The door must be guarded, not opened. We are becoming something new, but the change is killing who we were. Tell her. The entry ended there, mid-sentence, as if Dr. Chen had simply stopped existing in the middle of writing. "Where is she?" Lars asked. "Dr. Chen, where is her body?" Maya pointed to a section of the wall where human features were barely visible beneath layers of crystalline growth. She became part of the cave. All of them did, eventually. Their bodies couldn't handle the complete transformation, but their consciousness, their knowledge, it's still here. Still part of the crystal matrix. The sound of boots on stone echoed from the main chamber, professional and purposeful. Their pursuers had found the central crystal and were now systematically searching the connected chambers. "They'll find us soon," Maya whispered. "And when they do, they're going to try to take samples, run tests, bring in heavy equipment to extract the crystal. What happens if they succeed? The cave will defend itself the only way it can, by opening the passage completely and permanently." Maya's young face was grave with the weight of terrible knowledge. "Dr. Chen's journal mentions something called cascade failure. If the crystal is damaged or removed from its matrix, the doorway becomes unstable. Instead of controlled exchanges, it becomes a permanent breach. And the things on the other side? Some of them are peaceful refugees, like Dr. Chen wrote, but others..." Maya gestured toward the alien skeletal remains scattered throughout the chamber. "Others are predators, things that have been waiting for a chance to hunt in a new world." The footsteps were getting closer, and Lars could hear voices now, professional, military, coordinated. These weren't treasure hunters or curious scientists. These were people who'd come prepared for extraction and combat. "Maya," Lars said, making a decision that surprised him, "how do I help you protect this place?" She looked at him with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone her age. "Are you sure? Once you commit to being a guardian, there's no going back to your old life. The crystal changes you permanently." Lars thought about his cabin, his 30 years of isolation, his careful routine of avoiding connection and responsibility. Then he thought about Sarah and Emma, about the life he'd thrown away because he was too afraid to risk his heart again. "I haven't had a life worth going back to for 30 years, he said. "Maybe it's time to try living forward instead of backward." Maya smiled, and for the first time since he'd found her, she looked like the teenager she was supposed to be. "Then we need to get you ready for what's coming, because they're almost here, and this is about to get very dangerous." Dr. Chen's research journal felt warm in Lars's hands, its pages crackling with an energy that had nothing to do with static electricity. As he read deeper into the scientist's final entries, the handwriting began shifting before his eyes, transforming from English text into the flowing symbols that covered the cave walls. But somehow, impossibly, he could still understand every word. The guardian lineage is not genetic, it's spiritual, a resonance between human consciousness and the crystal matrix that allows for safe passage between realms. We thought technology could replace intuition, that instruments could substitute for instinct. We were wrong. The crystal chooses its guardians, and it chose her long before she knew what she was becoming. Maya watched Lars read with growing concern. "You're changing faster than you should." she said quietly. Most people take weeks to develop symbol recognition. You're doing it in hours. Why? Lars asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Because you're not just anyone. Maya pulled a photograph from Dr. Chen's research materials, a faded image showing a man and woman standing beside geological survey equipment. Lars recognized the location immediately, a site in Montana where he documented electromagnetic anomalies 20 years ago. The woman in the photograph was younger, but unmistakably Dr. Sarah Chen. The man beside her, wearing a USGS field jacket and holding a sampling device, was unmistakably Lars himself. "I remember this," he whispered. She was part of a joint expedition studying mineral formations near Glacier National Park. We worked together for 3 days, documenting some unusual readings near a limestone cave system. "She wrote about you extensively," Maya said, flipping through the journal's earlier entries. "Listen to this. Dr. Erickson has an intuitive understanding of geological anomalies that goes beyond standard scientific training. He documented 17 sites with properties that don't match known mineral formations, but he never pushed for further investigation. It's as if he understands instinctively that some things are meant to be observed but not disturbed." The voices of their pursuers grew closer, and Lars could hear equipment being deployed in the main chamber, the sounds of scientific instruments being set up rather than weapons being prepared. These people weren't here to fight, they were here to study and extract. Dr. Chen theorized that guardian potential runs in family lines, Maya continued, keeping her voice low. Not genetic inheritance, but something deeper. A spiritual compatibility with the crystal's energy signature that gets passed down through generations of people who understand the importance of protecting rather than exploiting. My family. Lars tried to remember. Anything unusual about his parents or grandparents, any hint that they might have known about places like this. "Your wife," Maya corrected gently. "Dr. Chen's research suggests that guardians often find each other without knowing what they are. They're drawn together by the same instincts that eventually lead them to places like this cave." The photograph trembled in Lars's hands as implications crashed over him like cold water. Sarah, had never shown any interest in his geological work. She'd been a kindergarten teacher who loved children and gardens and quiet Sunday mornings. But now that he thought about it, she'd always known when he was stressed about work, always seemed to understand the significance of his discoveries, even when he couldn't articulate why certain sites felt important. She knew, he realized. Somehow, she knew what I was finding out there, even when I didn't understand it myself. "Guardian pairs often balance each other," Maya said, reading from another section of the journal. "One develops the ability to locate and identify significant sites, while the other develops protective instincts and the ability to maintain stability during exposure to anomalous energies." Dr. Chen believed that separated guardians often struggle to reach their full potential alone. The sound of drilling equipment echoed from the main chamber, mechanical and aggressive. Their pursuers had found the central crystal and were attempting to take samples. "They're making a mistake," Maya said, her face pale with worry. "The crystal can't be sampled safely. Any attempt to remove material from its matrix will trigger defensive responses." "What kind of defensive responses?" Before Maya could answer, the cave around them began to vibrate with a sound that was felt rather than heard. The symbols on the walls flared with brilliant light, and the journal in Lars's hands grew warm enough to make him wince. In the main chamber, shouting voices mixed with the sounds of equipment malfunctioning and electronic systems failing. "It's starting," Maya whispered. "The crystal is activating emergency protocols." Through the connecting passages, Lars could see light pouring from the main chamber, not the gentle blue glow they'd seen before, but harsh white brilliance that hurt to look at directly. The drilling sounds had stopped, replaced by human voices raised in confusion and growing panic. "We need to get in there," Lars said, but Maya grabbed his arm. "Not yet. If we interfere now, while the crystal is defending itself, we could make things worse." She pulled him toward a natural observation point where they could see into the main chamber without exposing themselves to the energy discharge. What Lars saw made his scientific mind reel. The crystal formation had grown, physically expanded beyond its original dimensions, and its surface now pulsed with patterns of light so complex they seemed to create depth and movement in three-dimensional space. The symbols weren't just glowing, they were moving, flowing across the crystal surface like living text, writing and rewriting itself in real time. The military team in the chamber, 6 people in tactical gear with scientific equipment, had fallen back to the cave entrance, their instruments sparking and failing as the crystal's energy field expanded. But it was their leader who caught Lars's attention, a tall woman with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command, holding what looked like a handheld scanner that was somehow still functioning, despite the electromagnetic chaos around them. "Colonel Morrison," Maya breathed, and there was fear in her voice that Lars hadn't heard before. "She's been hunting me for 2 years. Colonel Morrison raised the scanner toward the crystal, and its display showed readings that defied physics energy outputs that should have been impossible, electromagnetic signatures that registered off any known scale. But, instead of retreating, the colonel smiled and spoke into a radio that crackled with static. "Base, this is Morrison. Confirm target acquisition. Site matches all theoretical parameters. Requesting immediate extraction team with containment protocols." "Containment protocols?" Lars asked. Maya's face went white. "They're not here to study it, they're here to take it. The whole thing." The crystal's light pulsed more rapidly, and somewhere in its depths, Lars could see movement shadows that suggested vast spaces beyond the physical cave, shapes that belonged to no earthly ecosystem, moving with purpose toward an opening that was growing larger by the moment. "The passage is destabilizing," Maya said. "If they try to extract the crystal now, while it's in defensive mode, the doorway will tear open completely." In the main chamber, Colonel Morrison was directing her team to set up equipment that Lars recognized as military-grade excavation gear devices designed to cut through rock and metal with precision and speed. They weren't planning to take samples, they were planning to remove the entire crystal formation. "How long do we have?" Lars asked. Maya consulted the journal, finding a section doctor. Chen had written about emergency protocols and cascade failures. "Once they start cutting, maybe 30 minutes before the passage tears open permanently. After that, everything on the other side comes through," Lars finished. The drilling equipment started up again, but this time it was aimed at the rock surrounding the crystal's base. Colonel Morrison's team was preparing to extract the entire formation, unaware that they were about to open a doorway that could never be closed. "Maya," Lars said, making a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff, "teach me how to be a guardian. Fast." Maya reached into her jacket and withdrew something that made Lars's breath catch a medallion that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its surface, covered with symbols that moved and shifted like living things. The moment she revealed it, the cave around them responded with a pulse of recognition that Lars felt in his bones. "This is why they've been hunting me," Maya said, holding the medallion with reverent care. "And why you were drawn to this place, even though you didn't know it existed." The medallion was ancient beyond measure. Its metal worked in patterns that suggested craftsmanship from a civilization that had never existed on Earth. But it wasn't the age of the artifact that shook Lars, it was the recognition. Somehow, impossibly, he knew this object. Had seen it before in dreams he'd dismissed as imagination. "What is it?" he asked, though part of him already understood. "The Guardian's medallion, the mark of a covenant between worlds that's older than human civilization." Maya's voice carried the weight of immense responsibility. There have been guardians protecting the passage points for thousands of years, keeping the balance between realms stable. I'm the last one. Last one? My grandmother was the guardian before me. She taught me the old ways, the proper protocols for maintaining the barriers between worlds. But she died 3 years ago, and I wasn't ready. I was just 13, still learning, when the covenant passed to me. Lars stared at the medallion, and as he watched, he began to see deeper layers of meaning in its design. The symbols weren't just decorative, they were a map, a guide, a key to understanding the relationship between the physical world and whatever lay beyond the crystal passages. "Maya," he said carefully, "are you human?" She was quiet for a long moment, the medallion pulsing gently in her hands. "I was born human, but the guardianship changes you, has to, because protecting a passage point requires abilities that normal humans don't possess." "What kind of abilities?" Instead of answering with words, Maya placed the medallion against her chest, and Lars watched her change. Her skin took on a subtle luminescence that matched the cave's ambient light. Her eyes reflected illumination like a cat's, and when she moved, it was with a fluid grace that belonged to no terrestrial creature. Enhanced senses, improved reflexes, the ability to communicate with the crystal matrix directly. Maya's voice carried harmonics now, layers of sound that resonated in frequencies human throats couldn't produce. And most importantly, the power to seal or open the passages when necessary. And the people hunting you want that power. They want more than that. Maya's expression grew grim. Colonel Morrison isn't just a military officer. She's the last descendant of the original Guardian lineage that was supposed to protect this site. But her family chose a different path. They decided that the passages should be opened permanently, that humanity should have access to the resources and territories of other realms. The drilling sounds from the main chamber intensified, and through the connecting passages, Lars could see sparks flying as military equipment attempted to cut through rock that was proving unexpectedly resistant. Dr. Chen discovered the truth about the Morrison family in her research, Maya continued, pulling more documents from the journal. They've been working for over a century to locate and exploit passage points, not to protect them, but to weaponize them. Lars read the documents with growing horror. The Morrison family had been involved in military research projects dating back to World War II, always focused on gaining technological advantages through the study of anomalous phenomena. They'd been behind expeditions to sites all over the world, places that matched the electromagnetic signatures and geological anomalies Lars had spent his career documenting. The sites I mapped, he realized, the anomalous readings I reported, were all potential passage points, Maya confirmed. Dr. Chen realized that your geological surveys had been providing the Morrison family with a treasure map for over 20 years. Every site you identified as anomalous, they investigated for military applications. The betrayal cut deep. Lars had spent his career believing he was contributing to scientific knowledge, documenting natural phenomena for the benefit of human understanding. Instead, he'd been unknowingly providing intelligence for people who wanted to tear holes between worlds. "Your wife knew," Maya said gently. "Doctor, Chen found evidence that Sarah had been trying to warn you. The car accident that killed your family, it wasn't an accident." The words hit Lars like a physical blow. The medallion in Maya's hands pulsed with sympathetic light, and suddenly he was flooded with memories he'd suppressed for 30 years. Sarah's growing anxiety in the weeks before the accident, her questions about his work that had seemed casual but now felt urgent, the way she'd insisted they needed to talk about something important the night before she died. She discovered the connection between your geological reports and the Morrison family's expeditions, Maya continued, reading from Dr. Chen's notes. She was planning to warn you, to help you understand what your work was really being used for. But Colonel Morrison's people found out first. Lars felt the world shifting around him. 30 years of grief and guilt, reorganizing themselves into a new pattern of understanding. Sarah hadn't died because of a random traffic accident. She died because she'd tried to protect him, tried to protect the world from the consequences of his unwitting collaboration with people who wanted to exploit forces beyond human comprehension. "The medallion responds to Guardian bloodlines," Maya said, extending the artifact toward him. "It's how we know who can be trusted with the knowledge of passage points. Doctor, Chen theorized that your wife carried Guardian potential and that your children would have inherited it." "Emma," Lars whispered, thinking of his daughter who'd never had the chance to grow up, never had the opportunity to discover what she might have become. "The Morrison family has been systematically eliminating potential guardians for decades," Maya continued. "Anyone who shows the ability to locate or understand passage points, anyone who poses a threat to their plans for opening permanent doorways between worlds." The medallion in Maya's hands began glowing more brightly, and Lars realized it was responding to his proximity. As his emotions intensified, grief transforming into anger, guilt reshaping itself into determination, the ancient artifact pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. "You're not just someone who happened to find me in your shed," Maya said. "You're the son of guardians, the husband of a guardian, the father of a guardian who never got the chance to fulfill her destiny. The crystal has been calling to you your entire life, drawing you to sites that needed protection, giving you the knowledge to document them without exploiting them." Lars reached out and touched the medallion, and the moment his skin made contact, the world exploded into clarity. He could see the energy flows throughout the cave system, could feel the presence of the creatures moving through the passage on the other side of the crystal, could sense the growing instability as Colonel Morrison's equipment continued its destructive work. But more than that, he could feel Sarah, her presence, her love, her desperate desire to protect him, even from beyond death. The medallion carried the memories of every guardian who'd worn it, and Sarah's essence was woven through its matrix like golden thread. "She's still here," he breathed, tears streaming down his face. "She's been trying to guide me home." "All guardians leave traces in the medallion when they die," Maya said softly. "Their knowledge, their love, their commitment to protecting the balance between the worlds. She's been waiting for you to be ready to accept your role." The drilling sounds reached a crescendo, and the cave around them shuddered as Colonel Morrison's equipment finally broke through the crystal's protective matrix. Alarms began blaring from the military equipment, and through the passages, Lars could hear voices raised in panic as energy readings spiked beyond all safe parameters. "It's starting," Maya said, the medallion blazing with urgent light. "The passage is destabilizing. If we don't stop them in the next few minutes, the breach will become permanent." Lars looked at the medallion, feeling the weight of destiny and choice. He could walk away, return to his cabin, spend the rest of his life in safe isolation. Or he could step forward into a role that would transform him completely, accepting responsibility for protecting a world that had taken everything he'd ever loved. But Sarah was there, in the medallion's glow, Emma's potential shining like starlight, and Maya looking at him with desperate hope. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "Show me how to save them," he said, and the medallion flared with light that seemed to come from the heart of creation itself. The covenant was passed, the last guardian was no longer alone, and in the main chamber, Colonel Morrison's equipment finally broke through to the crystal's core, sending cascades of interdimensional energy pouring into a world that wasn't prepared for what was about to come through. The sealing stones lay scattered throughout the deepest chamber of the cave system, like pieces of a puzzle that could save or damn two worlds. Each stone was roughly the size of a human heart, carved from the same dark material as Maya's medallion, and inscribed with symbols that seemed to write themselves in real time. But it was their function that made Lars's blood run cold, according to Dr. Chen's research notes. The stones could permanently seal any passage point, but only at the cost of a guardian's life force. "There are 7 stones," Maya explained, gathering them with reverent care while the sounds of Colonel Morrison's operation grew more destructive in the main chamber. "One for each of the major passage points that connect our world to the others. This cave is the primary nexus. If we can seal it permanently, all the other passages become dormant." Lars examined one of the stones, feeling its weight, both physical and spiritual. The moment his guardian-enhanced senses touched its surface, he was flooded with knowledge, the history of the passages, the countless guardians who'd given their lives to maintain the balance between worlds, the growing instability as humanity's technology advanced beyond its wisdom. "Dr. Chen tried to use them," he said, reading the final entries in her journal. "She thought she could activate the sealing protocol without the ultimate sacrifice. She was wrong," Maya replied quietly. "The stones require a complete energy transfer. The Guardian's life force becomes the permanent seal. That's why my grandmother waited until she was dying of natural causes before sealing the passage point she protected in Tibet. She wanted to make sure I was ready to take over responsibility for this site." The cave shuddered around them as another piece of military equipment broke through the crystal's defenses. Through the connecting passages, Lars could see energy discharges that painted the walls in colors that didn't exist in normal spectrum. The interdimensional breach was expanding rapidly, and shadows were beginning to move on the other side, shapes that suggested intelligence and purpose. "How much time do we have?" Lars asked. Maya consulted instruments that were part scientific device, part mystical artifact tools, passed down through generations of guardians that could monitor the stability of passage points across multiple dimensions. "The breach is at 30% expansion. Once it reaches 50%, the destabilization becomes irreversible even if we stop the drilling. And after that, complete cascade failure. The passage tears open permanently, and everything on the other side has free access to our world." Maya's face was grim as she showed him readings that spiked far beyond any safe parameters. "Dr. Chen's research suggests that some of the entities waiting beyond are peaceful refugees from dying worlds. But others..." She didn't need to finish. The skeletal remains scattered throughout the cave told that story clearly enough. Lars watched Maya prepare the sealing stones with practiced efficiency, arranging them in a pattern that matched the symbol flows on the cave walls. Her movements carried the weight of years of training, knowledge passed down through generations of women who'd accepted the responsibility of standing between worlds. "Maya," he said carefully, "you're planning to sacrifice yourself." "It's what guardians do," she replied without looking up from her work. "My grandmother prepared me for this possibility from the time I was old enough to understand. The passage points are more important than any individual life, even a guardian's life. But you're 16 years old. I'm the last guardian of this site. If I don't seal it, millions of people could die when the hostile entities come through." Maya's voice carried a maturity that belonged to someone much older, someone who'd already accepted the weight of impossible choices. "My age doesn't change my responsibility." Lars felt something stirring in his chest, the protective instinct that had made him a good father, the fierce love that had defined his marriage to Sarah. But this time, instead of losing someone he cared about, maybe he could save them. "What if there's another way?" he asked. Maya shook her head. Dr. Chen spent months researching alternatives. The sealing stones only respond to a guardian's complete life force transfer. There's no partial activation, no technological workaround. The ancient covenant is very specific about the price, but there are 2 guardians here now. You're not fully transformed yet. It takes months or years to develop the complete connection to the crystal matrix that the stones require. Maya paused in her preparations, looking at him with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. "Lars, I know you want to help, but nothing." Lars picked up one of the sealing stones, feeling its power resonate with something deep in his transformed consciousness. "I've spent 30 years running from responsibility, avoiding connection, protecting myself from loss. Maybe it's time I protected someone else instead." The guardian medallion around Maya's neck pulsed with urgent light, and suddenly Lars could feel what she felt. The growing pressure as the passage destabilized, the presence of entities beyond, pushing against the weakening barriers. The countdown to catastrophe measured in minutes rather than hours. "Even if you could activate the stones," Maya said desperately, "you have a chance at a normal life. You could leave this place, go back to your cabin, live out your years in peace. I don't have that option. I was born to be a guardian, it's all I've ever been." "And what kind of life would that be?" Lars asked. "Knowing I let a child sacrifice herself because I was too selfish to take her place? Spending whatever years I have left wondering what Emma would think of a father who chose safety over protecting innocence?" Through the passages, the sounds of Colonel Morrison's operation reached a new level of intensity. Whatever barriers the crystal had erected were failing rapidly, and the energy discharges were becoming visible even from their distant chamber, brilliant flashes that spoke of fundamental forces being unleashed without proper containment. "They're almost through to the core," Maya said, checking her instruments with growing alarm. "Once they breach the cloud, central matrix, we'll have maybe 10 minutes before total cascade failure." Lars studied the sealing stones, feeling their ancient power calling to something in his guardian-enhanced consciousness. But beyond the mechanics of their function, beyond the question of who would pay the ultimate price, he sensed something else, a resonance that reminded him of Sarah's presence in the medallion. "Maya," he said slowly, "what if the stones don't require just one guardian's life force? What if they can accept a partial transfer from multiple guardians? That's not how the covenant works. The ancient texts are very specific. The ancient texts were written by people who didn't understand the full potential of guardian bonds. Lars pulled out Dr. Chen's journal, flipping to a section he'd noticed earlier. Look at this entry. Guardian pairs often share energetic resonance patterns that allow for enhanced cooperative abilities. The connection between bonded guardians appears to create synergistic effects that exceed the sum of individual capabilities. Maya read the passage with growing hope and understanding. You think we could share the energy cost? I think Sarah led me here for a reason beyond just helping you seal the passage. Lars felt his wife's presence more strongly now, a warmth that surrounded him like an embrace. She knew I'd need to learn how to sacrifice for someone else, how to choose love over safety. But she also knew I'd need you to teach me how to be brave enough to do it. The medallion around Maya's neck flared with brilliant light, and suddenly both guardians could feel it, a connection forming between them that transcended individual consciousness. The bond that Dr. Chen had theorized, the cooperative link that allowed guardian pairs to achieve what neither could accomplish alone. It might work, Maya breathed, wonder replacing despair in her voice. If we can synchronize our life force transfer, share the energy cost equally, then we both survive to continue protecting the passage points. Lars finished. Together. An explosion of sound and light erupted from the main chamber as Colonel Morrison's equipment finally breached the crystal's core. Energy poured through the cave system like liquid lightning, and in its wake came sounds that belonged to no earthly creature, roars and chittering calls that spoke of intelligence and hunger. They're coming through, Maya said, the ceiling stones blazing with responsive light in her hands. Whatever we're going to do, we have to do it now. Lars took half the stones, feeling their power merge with his transformed consciousness. Around them, the cave itself seemed to be preparing for the final confrontation, symbols blazing on every surface as ancient protocols activated in response to the threat. Together, he asked, extending his hand toward Maya. Together, she agreed, taking his hand and completing the guardian bond that would either save two worlds or die trying. The ceiling stones pulsed with combined light as two guardians prepared to risk everything for the sake of millions they would never meet. In the main chamber, creatures from beyond began pushing through the expanding breach, and Colonel Morrison's team realized too late that they had unleashed forces far beyond their ability to control. The final battle for the future of both worlds was about to begin. Lars's father's hunting rifle felt heavier in his hands than it had in 3 decades, its worn wooden stock carrying the weight of family history and the promise of protection. The weapon had belonged to 3 generations of Eriksson men, passed down along with stories of hunting trips and lessons about respecting the power of life and death. Now it would serve a purpose his grandfather could never have imagined, defending the boundaries between worlds. Remember, Maya whispered as they approached the main chamber, we're not trying to hurt Colonel Morrison's people if we can avoid it. They don't understand what they're unleashing. Lars nodded, though his grip on the rifle remained firm. The weapon wasn't his primary tool for the coming confrontation. The ceiling stones pulsed with far greater power in the pack at his side, but sometimes the familiar weight of something solid and reliable helped steady the mind before stepping into the impossible. The main chamber had transformed into something from a nightmare. The central crystal formation now towered nearly 40 feet high, its surface crackling with energy discharges that painted the cavern walls in shifting patterns of light and shadow. Where Colonel Morrison's equipment had breached the crystal's matrix, Tears in reality itself showed glimpses of another world, a place of twisted architecture and skies that burned with alien colors. Through the largest breach, creatures were beginning to emerge. The first ones through were small, scuttling things with too many joints and eyes that reflected light like mirrors. They moved with insectoid precision, testing the air and ground of the new world they'd found, sending information back to whatever intelligence controlled them. But behind them, in the depths of the interdimensional tear, larger shapes waited with patient hunger. Colonel Morrison's team had fallen back to the cave entrance, their extraction equipment abandoned as the situation spiraled beyond their control. The colonel herself stood at the edge of the chaos with a scanner in one hand and a sidearm in the other, her face mixing wonder and terror as she watched creatures from beyond pour into her world. "Base, this is Morrison," she barked into her radio. "Situation has exceeded all parameters, requesting immediate tactical support and containment protocols." Static answered her. The energy discharges from the crystal were interfering with electronic communications, leaving her team isolated with the consequences of their actions. "She's going to try to control them," Maya observed, watching the colonel direct her remaining people into defensive positions. "She still thinks she can turn this into a military asset." Lars studied the scene through the scope of his rifle, noting the positions of Morrison's team and the growing number of creatures emerging from the breach. "How long before the larger ones come through? The passage has to stabilize first," Maya replied, consulting the Guardian instruments that glowed with their own inner light. "Right now it's too chaotic for anything bigger than those scouts." But once the energy flow settles into a stable pattern, her words were cut off as something the size of a bear pushed through the largest tear, its form shifting and flowing like liquid shadow given substance. The creature had multiple limbs that ended in appendages that might have been hands or claws, and when it opened what might have been a mouth, the sound it made was like metal screaming. The scouts immediately began moving toward Morrison's team with increased purpose, no longer cautious explorers, but organized hunters responding to the larger creature's commands. "Now would be a good time to start the sealing process," Lars said, raising his rifle as one of the scout creatures turned in their direction. Maya began pulling the sealing stones from her pack, arranging them in the pattern they'd practiced, while the chaos in the main chamber intensified. "I need 3 minutes to set the matrix properly. Can you buy us that much time?" "I can try." The first shot from Lars's rifle took the nearest scout creature center mass, sending it spinning backward with a sound like breaking glass. The wound leaked, not blood, but something that looked like liquid starlight, and the creature's death cry brought immediate attention from its companions. "They know we're here," Maya said, working faster with the stones. More creatures were emerging from the breach, some small and quick, others larger and more, deliberately menacing. Colonel Morrison's team opened fire with automatic weapons, but their bullets seemed to have minimal effect on entities that operated by different physical laws. The large shadow creature turned toward the gunfire with predatory interest, flowing across the chamber floor like spilled ink. When it reached the first of Morrison's soldiers, the man's screams cut through the cave's chaotic symphony for exactly 3 seconds before stopping abruptly. "Maya," Lars said, putting another round into a creature that was climbing the wall toward their position. "Work faster." "Almost ready. But Lars, once I activate the sealing matrix, the stones will pull every available Guardian energy in this chamber. That includes Colonel Morrison." Lars paused in his reloading. "What does that mean?" "She's descended from the original Guardian lineage, even if she's chosen to corrupt it. The stones won't distinguish between Guardians who protect and Guardians who exploit." Maya's face was pale as she arranged the final stone. "If we activate the seal while she's in range, it could kill her along with us." Through the chaos, Lars could see Colonel Morrison retreating toward the cave entrance as her team fell back before the advancing creatures. She was still clutching her scanner, still trying to document and understand rather than simply escape. "We have to warn her," Lars said. "If we warn her, she'll try to stop us," Maya replied. "She's spent her entire career trying to open permanent passages. She won't let us seal this one without a fight." The shadow creature had eliminated 3 of Morrison's soldiers and was flowing toward the 4th with unstoppable purpose. More creatures poured through the breach, and the energy readings on Maya's instruments spiked into ranges that meant imminent cascade failure. "Decision time," Maya said, her hand hovering over the central sealing stone. "Save her and risk losing everything, or save both worlds and accept that she chose her own fate." Lars looked at Colonel Morrison, a woman who'd spent decades hunting children, killing families, exploiting forces beyond human comprehension for military advantage. A woman who'd ordered his wife's death and destroyed his family in pursuit of power. Then he thought about Sarah, about the choice between justice and mercy, about what it meant to be a guardian rather than an executioner. "We warn her," he said, and shouted across the chaos, "Colonel Morrison, get out of the chamber! Now!" The heart of the mountain revealed itself as Maya completed the sealing stone pattern, the cave's central energy core rising from the floor like a beating organ made of crystallized light. This was the source that powered the passage network across multiple worlds, the nexus that had to be destroyed to permanently seal the breach. But looking at it, Lars understood that destroying something so beautiful, so impossibly complex, would be like cutting out the heart of creation itself. "This is what holds the passages stable," Maya explained, her voice barely audible over the chaos as creatures poured through the expanding breach. "If we channel the sealing stone's energy through the heart, we can collapse the entire network permanently." Colonel Morrison heard Lars's warning and looked up from her scanner with eyes that blazed with desperate ambition. "You don't understand what you're doing," she shouted back. "This is the greatest discovery in human history. We can't just destroy it." "Watch us," Maya called back, placing her hands on the first sealing stone. Morrison raised her sidearm, pointing it directly at Maya. "I won't let you waste this opportunity. Humanity deserves access to the resources beyond that passage." The shadow creature flowing across the chamber floor reached Morrison's last surviving soldier, and the man's death scream echoed through the cavern as his body was absorbed into the entity's mass. The creature had grown larger. With each person it consumed, its form becoming more defined and deliberately menacing. "Colonel!" Lars shouted, keeping his rifle trained on the approaching scouts while trying to reason with a woman whose family had spent generations corrupting the Guardian tradition. "Those things aren't resources, they're predators. You can't control them." "Everything can be controlled with the right understanding," Morrison replied, but her voice carried a note of doubt as more creatures emerged from the breach. The latest arrivals were larger still, with forms that suggested intelligence and malevolent purpose. Maya began the activation sequence, and the sealing stones responded with brilliant light that made the crystal formations throughout the cave sing in harmonic resonance. The heart of the mountain pulsed faster, its energy flows visible as streams of liquid light that connected to every symbol on the chamber walls. "Lars," Maya said through gritted teeth, as Guardian energy began flowing out of her body and into the stones, "I need you to channel your power into the pattern now. I can't sustain this alone." Lars felt the pull immediately, his life force being drawn toward the sealing matrix with inexorable power. But this time, instead of the complete drain that would have killed a single guardian, the energy was shared between them, distributed across their bonded consciousness in a way that felt sustainable. Colonel Morrison saw what they were doing and made her choice. Instead of fleeing the chamber as Lars had warned, she sprinted toward them, her weapon raised and her face twisted with fanatic determination. "I won't let you destroy humanity's future," she screamed, firing as she ran. The bullet meant for Maya struck Lars in the shoulder, spinning him away from the sealing stone pattern just as the energy transfer reached its critical phase. Pain exploded through his body. But worse was the disruption to the Guardian bond. Suddenly Maya was bearing the full weight of the sealing process alone. "No," Maya gasped, as the energy drain spiked beyond sustainable levels. "Lars, I need you in the pattern." Blood flowing down his arm, Lars fought to rejoin the sealing matrix, while Colonel Morrison closed the distance between them. But the shadow creature had noticed the commotion and was flowing toward their group with predatory interest, drawn by the scent of blood and the energy discharges from the sealing stones. Morrison reached the stone pattern just as the heart of the mountain began to pulse with critical instability. The central core was responding to the sealing energy by drawing power from across the entire passage network, preparing to either stabilize permanently or collapse catastrophically. "You don't understand," Morrison said, her weapon trained on Maya as the teenager poured her life force into the stones. "My family has been working toward this moment for over a century. I won't let children destroy what generations of Morrisons have built." "Your family has been corrupting the Guardian tradition for a century," Lars replied, struggling to maintain his connection to the sealing matrix despite the pain in his shoulder. They turned protection into exploitation. The shadow creature reached them just as Morrison prepared to fire again. But instead of attacking the Guardians, it flowed around Colonel Morrison with almost gentle curiosity, as if recognizing something familiar in her corrupted Guardian essence. "What?" Morrison began, then screamed as the creature began absorbing her energy just as it had her soldiers. But this time was different. Instead of simply consuming her, the creature was reading her, learning from her memories and motivations. Through the connection, it began to understand human ambition, human hunger for power and dominance. "It's learning about us," Maya realized with horror as the shadow creature grew larger and more defined, taking on aspects of Morrison's consciousness. "It's becoming something that understands how humans think." The heart of the mountain pulsed with final warning as the sealing energy reached critical mass. In seconds, the entire chamber would either be permanently sealed or torn open beyond any hope of repair. "Now or never," Lars said, rejoining the pattern despite his wound. "Together." Maya nodded, and both Guardians poured everything they had into the sealing stones, accepting the cost and trusting in their bond to see them through. The heart of the mountain blazed with light that seemed to come from the center of existence itself, then began to crack. 6 months later, the blank notebook felt different in Lars's weathered hands than any geological survey report he'd ever written. The pages were clean and waiting, ready to receive the story that needed to be told, not for scientific documentation or government archives, but for the future Guardians who would one day need to understand what had happened in that cave and why the choices made there mattered. He sat on the porch of their new cabin, tucked into a valley 300 miles south of the sealed passage point, watching Maya practice her morning exercises in the clearing below. At 17 now, she moved with the fluid grace of someone fully grown into her Guardian abilities. But there was something else in her movements, the easy confidence of a teenager who'd finally found a place where she belonged. The new journal would record everything: the cave, the crystal, the creatures from beyond, and the price paid to keep two worlds safe. But it would also record the unexpected gift that had emerged from their sacrifice, the discovery that shared guardian bonds could not only distribute the cost of sealing passages, but actually strengthen both participants in the process. "Writing again?" Maya asked, climbing the porch steps with 2 cups of coffee steaming in the morning air. "Someone needs to document what we learned." "Lars," replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The next Guardians shouldn't have to figure everything out from scratch the way we did." Maya settled into the chair beside him, and Lars marveled again at the transformation in both of them. The cave's destruction had changed them in ways that went beyond their guardian abilities. The shared experience of nearly dying to save the world had forged a bond that felt like the family connection he'd thought was lost forever. "Any word from the monitoring stations?" he asked. Maya pulled out a device that looked like a compass, but measured interdimensional stability instead of magnetic direction. "All green across the network, 17 passage points worldwide, all dormant and stable. Whatever we did to the heart of the mountain, it worked exactly as Dr. Chen theorized. The sealing process had collapsed the entire global network of passage points, not just the one in Alaska, every site Lars had ever documented as an anomalous reading, every location the Morrison family had investigated for military purposes, every place where the boundaries between worlds had grown thin. All of them were now permanently sealed. But the price had been higher than either of them expected. The shared guardian bond had saved their lives, but left them permanently changed. Lars could feel Maya's emotions as clearly as his own, and she carried the weight of his 3 decades of grief alongside her own experiences. They were connected now in ways that made traditional family relationships seem shallow by comparison. "Do you regret it?" Maya asked, following his thoughts with the ease of shared consciousness. "Giving up your quiet life for all this responsibility?" Lars considered the question while watching steam rise from his coffee. The old cabin was gone, burned to the ground by cleanup crews who'd arrived too late to witness the actual events, but had found enough residual energy readings to classify the site as permanently hazardous. His 3 decades of careful isolation had ended the moment he'd chosen to protect Maya instead of his own safety. But regret? Looking at the young woman who'd become the daughter he'd never expected to have again, feeling Sarah's presence still warm in the guardian medallion that now hung around his neck, knowing that millions of people would live normal lives because 2 guardians had been willing to risk everything, regret seemed like the wrong word entirely. "I regret that it took me 30 years to learn how to be brave," he said finally. "I regret that Sarah and Emma died before I understood what being a guardian really meant. But this," he gestured to encompass their new life, their shared responsibility, the peaceful valley that hid their continued work. "This feels like coming home." Maya smiled, and in that expression Lars could see echoes of every guardian who'd come before them, the long line of protectors who'd chosen service over safety across countless generations. "Do you think there are others out there, people like us who carry guardian potential but don't know it yet?" "Dr. Chen's research suggests there are," Lars replied, turning to a section of his notes that dealt with population genetics and spiritual inheritance. "Guardian bloodlines don't disappear when passage points are sealed, they just go dormant. But if new threats emerge, if the boundaries between worlds weaken again, those abilities will reactivate. Then we'll need to be ready to train them," Maya said, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd accepted a lifetime of responsibility before her 18th birthday. Lars nodded, making another note in the journal. They'd spent 6 months establishing this new life, creating a base of operations disguised as a simple homestead, but equipped with instruments that could monitor interdimensional stability across the globe. If any of the sealed passages showed signs of weakening, if new anomalies appeared, if humanity's advancing technology once again threatened to tear holes between worlds, they would know immediately. But for now, there was peace. The creatures from beyond had been returned to their own realm. When the passages collapsed, the corrupted Morrison family line had ended with the Colonel's death, and the balance between worlds was stable for the first time in over a century. "What will you call it?" Maya asked, nodding toward the journal that would become their legacy for future Guardians. Lars thought about everything they'd experienced, about the choice between isolation and connection, about learning to love someone enough to risk everything for their safety. "The Guardian's Chronicle," he said finally, "a record of what it means to protect rather than possess." He wrote the title on the first page, then began the story that would explain to future Guardians how an old man learned to care again, and a young woman learned that she didn't have to face the darkness alone. Outside their window, the valley stretched away toward mountains that held no hidden passages, no ancient secrets, no threats from beyond the boundaries of the known world. For the first time in 30 years, Lars Eriksson was exactly where he belonged,